You're listening to Live Wild Radio, the part-time adventure podcast.
Join us as we explore how outdoor adventures build mind, body, and spirit.
So this episode's brought to you by our friends at Great Lakes Gear. You've heard us talk about them before. They're our favorite fitness companies. They ship to Canada. They ship to the U.S. If you happen to live like us in the Waterloo region, in just outside of Toronto, you can go pick it up and not pay any shipping. But these guys have kettlebells, barbells, squat racks, pull-up bars, gymnastics rings, maces, bumper plates, dumbbells, all of the stuff you need to get in fabulous shape with your killer home gym. Because yes, gyms might be open again, but as you've heard us talk over and over again about different workouts, being able to work out on your time, get in a 15-minute workout without having to leave the house, that can be life-changing. So even if you just pick yourself up a couple of kettlebells so you can do some swings and snatches and presses, some goblet squats and Turkish get-ups, all of our favorite exercises, if you go to greatlakesgear.com or us.greatlakesgear.com if you're our American friends, and at checkout, you use promo code LIVEWILD, you'll save 5%. And it helps because they give us a little bit. You don't pay any more. In fact, you save, and it helps. So head over to greatlakesgear.com and pick up any fitness equipment you need. So welcome back to episode 3 in Live Wild Radio's longevity series. I was going to make a joke about it's taking so long, so you have to live long enough to hear about it all. But so in this episode, we are going to talk about better living through chemistry. That was sort of the fun little tag we put on it. So before we get going, though, we're going to do a little disclaimer. We're not doctors or medical professionals. And anything we're talking about is either things that have been researched, like in the scientific literature, or, with our own experimentation. As far as things that make you feel better or perform better. And anything that we've tried ourselves is based on that there was good scientific data to give it a shot. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, basically anything that we have to say here today, talk to your doctor first before you do it yourself. Because you never know, like especially if you're on any medications.
Oh, God, yeah.
How something could interact or what have you.
Yeah.
So medical disclaimer out of the way.
Yeah.
We're not doctors. We just play doctors sometimes.
I was going to say that. I was actually thinking that earlier, not that now.
Although when you think about it, I don't think we actually ever have we?
That's too much information.
I'm just saying.
All right, let's get started. So, with this topic, I thought it was worthwhile just to talk a little bit about our experience with it. And I will say for myself, it's been quite limited, although there's 2 things that really stand out. So I grew up in a household in the 80s. My parents were pretty dependent on medications. My dad took sleeping pills. My mom, at some point, took some Prozac. She was prescribed for that during going through, menstruation, menopause, I should say. A time where I think it was a pill popping culture. Mm-hmm. Okay. And not that I was being a big rebel or anything, but I kind of adopted and went the other way. I kind of avoided, pill popping and I was too young to, obviously, anyways. I was in good health, but nevertheless, that never was with me as I grew older. I took my vaccinations. I took my COVID vaccination. Just FYI. But I also, I did the norms, yeah. Right? But that's just my background. And then it wasn't until you and I met and I had my issue with my knees that it kind of started with things as simple as omega-3s, mm-hmm. Right? And how much that probably in combination with water and some strength training and, helped my knees. I noticed a difference. I'm like, oh, there's something here. And by that point, I was 40 years old, starting to feel the age, of being that, or the wear of your body at that age. And then the next major key milestone would be stem cell therapy. That's something I did on my knees, so that's a whole other process of taking body chemistry essentially. Anyways, injecting that into the areas of which need it. So that's a bit about my experience. And then I'll comment on some of these things that Winston has suggested I take. And I have noticed some significant improvements for energy, etc. But it's somewhat limited. But I will give you what I've experienced. I haven't done any research on this. I always rely on Winston. But I will say, lastly, very important that you don't willy-nilly mix your medications.
Or your supplements.
Basically, we're talking about the supplements. Yeah. In particular, it's a big deal. I have experienced on one or two occasions not the feeling too well. Like, I was dying. So, the sweats, nausea, all that stuff. I was not doing well. I think I took 2 doses of iron by accident. Not good. And the other time, it was a mix of my whey protein and something else. It was just on an empty stomach. Didn't go over well. So anyway, just be, I think, careful that when you do mix things, just to make sure that it's okay to do that. Overall, I've checked with you. I like the kind of things that I take in a day, just to put it in perspective on this topic, are, half a dozen of omega-3s. Right? And they're at what milligrams?
Well, I don't know what ones you bought.
Whatever.
Okay. We're aiming for 3 grams a day, 3,000 milligrams a day.
Yeah. And then I take a multivitamin. I take vitamin D. I take about 5,000 IUs.
Yep. International units.
Yeah. I take, what else do I take?
Magnesium.
That's at nighttime. Yeah. If I remember. And I was saying to Winston, he needs to buy me a pill box. So because I don't know how many times I have so many things to take, and for other purposes I won't get into, but it's just hard to keep it all straight and when to take it, what goes with food. So, morning, lunch, because I fast in the morning, and then evenings. So it's kind of a range. So Winston, what's your connection or relationship with chemistry?
Well, so for me, the interest in whether it's supplementation, all of this kind of stuff, we're talking about it in relation to longevity right now. But for me, it started with athletic performance as a teenager. So it was one of these things where when I was still in high school, I ran my own supplement company because somebody was stupid enough, like a distributor was stupid enough to sell me shit. So I would sell like bodybuilding and fitness supplements to other high school kids. And so that was one of my sort of first entrepreneurial things. And what was really kind of cool with it is I was a nerd about, I didn't want to just sell stuff, right? I wanted to sell stuff that actually worked, right? And so much of the supplement industry is snake oil. I always joke that if you opened up a health food store that only sold things that had like scientific validity, like, solid research behind it, and that in that research the effect of the product was statistically significant enough to make it worthwhile taking, that supplement store would fit in a phone booth, right? There's a ton of, like, you go to any supplement store, shelves and shelves and shelves.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because is it just in Canada or the U.S. as well that it's not regulated?
It's the fucking Wild West.
Versus medications.
Yeah.
Right? Like cough syrup would be different. Because that was in the news recently, that some parents had I'm not sure if it was adverse reaction with their child, or it must have been adverse reaction. And they found that in the pharmacy, they were using some homeopathic, brew
Yeah.
for their child, and it didn't go over well. And they're seeing that pharmacists don't even let people know that these aren't even medically, or approved by Health Canada or the FDA, or is it the FDA as well, that it's the same situation, that they're not regulated?
Yeah, in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that worldwide, or is that?
No, like it varies country to country. Like we ran into the thing, and this is a little tangent, but like the supplement rules are strange, right? So in the US, the hormone DHEA, which is basically a precursor to testosterone and estrogen and blah, 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 you can just buy over the counter at a health food store. In Canada, you can't. But in the US, you can't buy ephedrine, which is a bronchodilator, but also is combined with caffeine, a clinically, scientifically tested fat burner, like that combination. Suppresses your appetite, burns more fat. And, there's good research behind it. So in Canada, we can buy that and use it. In the US, they can't. Right? So it's not even like we have kind of like they're talking on either side, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
About what things we're going to ban and which ones we're not. Like if you think back to the 90s, it was the fucking Wild West as far as supplements go before they cracked down on anything, because you'd have things like Agent Orange, which was this energy kind of like precursor to the modern pre-workout, but it was jam-packed with like caffeine and ephedrine, and like it was the kind of thing, like it was speed.
Yeah, I was going to say things that can even make you sick, right?
Oh yeah, like if you took too much.
Yeah.
Right? Or like in the States, the reason why they banned ephedrine is that you'd have football players trying to get in shape, and because it makes you be able to have more energy and go harder, like it's banned for international competition. Like it'll improve your endurance performance, but because it ramps up your metabolism, it raises your body temperature. If you're out in the heat, people are dropping dead of heat stroke because you're already in an environment that's a risk if you're exercising hard. And then you exercise even harder, right? You're getting your core temperature even higher. So it's one of those things where, if somebody sticks to the prescribed, or the studied dosage, which is 200 milligrams of caffeine and 25 milligrams of ephedrine, and people don't have a pre-existing cardiac.
How much is in a coffee, by the way, would you say?
Depends, like an extra large coffee's got about 150.
Oh, so even my coffee's not enough, because I have this, by the way. I usually just take coffee. I don't even take the caffeine tablets because I figure if I have the coffee, I'm good.
Well, you're pretty close. Like I wouldn't take the caffeine with a coffee.
Right.
Because that is, now you're talking almost double.
Exactly.
So it's one of those things where
I haven't noticed a big appetite suppressant. Maybe I'm not doing it 100%. Because how long does it take to do that, to feel the effect?
Like 20 minutes. So
it's instant.
Yeah, like it's a central nervous system stimulant.
In terms of not feeling hungry.
Yeah, because and it's one of those things too. It's like any stimulants, your body adapts to them.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on how long you used it for, that's why with things like that, you really want to cycle them rather than just do it all the time.
Yeah.
Because your body just doesn't do anything.
It adapts.
Right.
Right. That's true.
But then you're off caffeine for a while.
Yeah.
And then when you get on like the smallest, cup of coffee, and you're like, you're shaking.
Okay.
Right. It's just all the receptors have downregulated. But so for me, this is sort of a long-winded way, which is sort of my way.
I actually enjoyed it this time. Go on.
Okay. My long-winded diatribes. But it's the coming back to, looking for things you can use that will improve health, performance, and for me, it was athletic performance, how to build muscle. And, one of the things I discovered about the muscle thing was if you really want to get big, because I got a membership at like World's Gym in Brampton when I was a teenager. And then I realized, everybody's on, like everybody who like looks like a superhero is on steroids. There's going to be a few outliers, like, everything in life is a bell curve. There's going to be a few people who, even if they took steroids, are going to look like stick figures. And then there's a few people that look like they take steroids, even if they don't, like on the far end, right?
Yeah.
But most people, if you want to look like that person, right, you have to take steroids, right? It's just, the human body, because of its evolution about survival, you can add some muscle and you can look pretty good with your shirt off. But to get those, like, to look jacked, you know what I mean? Without, and especially be super lean. Because when you're in a caloric deficit, your body reduces its production of testosterone. So, because it's trying to protect itself.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going, hey, wait, I'm starving. So it always comes into one of these things. Like if you want to have big muscles and low body fat, that is not a normal human condition.
Okay.
Right. So that's why, it was one of those things I learned very early on.
Same thing with women. Will that affect their hormonal?
What?
Big muscles, lean muscle.
Well, if a woman
fat.
gets too lean, her period stops. Like her whole system's fucked because it's...
And then that'll fuck up with her hormones. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like her period stops because her hormones are fucked up.
Yeah.
So, like it's one of those things where there's sort of like a sweet spot for health and looking pretty good, because that's such a relative thing, right? Like looking good.
Yeah.
But if you're ripped and that's just not your natural state of being, because I've worked with athletes who, like they don't try, like there's not like a cosmetic thing of like, I just want to have like a totally ripped 8-pack with veins in my abs. But they just look that way naturally. Right.
That's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just where their body fat set point is just naturally so low. But it's, again, the bell curve. And not very... if you have that potential, you already know it.
Right.
Right? It's not like you're some secret freak and you just, I just didn't unlock the key. It's like, no, you were a super athlete your whole life.
Right.
But you run into the thing where that sort of started... the working with supplements and things like that and wanting to optimize my performance, started sort of a lifelong thing with it. Right. Like even down to things like when it came to bike racing, feeding strategies that would keep more energy going in, right? Like training your body to absorb more calories per hour, nothing to do with longevity, but just optimizing performance. And now I'm sort of at a point in my life where I want to perform well, but I want to be healthy.
And I think a lot of people often their number one complaint is energy. I think that's something that a lot of people will be one of the first things that they talk about is just, I'm so tired all the time.
Yeah, which is going to be covered in our next episode. Because 90% of people tired all the time
is sleep.
And a little bit it will cover in the chemistry, right?
Because quality of sleep.
Yeah. It's
and
like,
quantity.
Yeah. Like if you don't get enough, and this is just a preview, because stress management and sleep is the next episode. So everything in this is all interconnected. Yeah. Right? So sometimes low energy could be from nutrient deficiencies. Right? So it's kind of a low-hanging fruit in a sense. Like, if you make sure that you're not deficient in anything, or if you are, you bring those levels up.
Right.
And ta-da, all of a sudden, at least that part is optimized.
Right.
And you've really sort of set us up for a perfect segue.
I know I was going to be kind and not interrupt you because I interrupt you all the time.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, and that's a perfect segue to go into blood panels.
Yeah.
How do you measure benchmark? Like, where do you even start? And so what we suggest is that you do speak to your doctor, or you go through somebody else,
like a
naturopath, and you get a requisition for blood panels.
Yeah.
And so what I've been doing the past couple of years, just to benchmark how I'm doing, especially with being on the keto diet, I think that's what really prompted me to do it, was to make sure all my vitamins and nutrients were in check, was to do that. It cost me $550 Canadian and I don't know if this is like standard terminology, but I had the the expanded version.
Well, because yours was a full nutrient workup in addition to a blood panel, right?
Okay.
So there's basically, in layman's terms, you're going to have your blood information, like your red blood cell count, your hematocrit level, things like hemoglobin, so all the things to do with your blood. Then, and that's one of the ones I'm surprised with yours. They didn't do anything with hormones, right? They didn't look at your estrogen, your testosterone, your progesterone.
I can still do that, actually.
Yeah, but like that one, and this is the thing too. When Catherine sort of said the price, one of the things you can do is, if you happen to have benefits at work,
right?
If it's through a naturopathic doctor and you have benefits from that, then your insurance will probably cover a good chunk of it.
They paid for everything.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Which is, really enlightening to tell you and make you aware of where you're at.
Yeah.
And in my case, it was initially about inflammation. We were trying to check that a couple of years ago. And then because I was on keto diet, everybody wanted to make sure, everything else was in check. And I think I needed at the time B12 to help me, which that was one that really I noticed a big improvement in my energy levels. Because with keto diet, you tend to have brain fog. And I mean, and this is kind of neat too, if you just stick with the electrolytes, like if you just do as they prescribe, right? Sea salt and lemon juice and mint, I think it was, or I can't remember, or sometimes bone broth. Those have the electrolytes that you need. And if you put a pinch of sea salt in everything, like that usually really helped me. But, and then more recently, it was just, again, my doctor was really concerned about, do I have too much, is it too hard on my liver, right?
No, it was your kidneys.
My kidneys?
Yes, and this is one of those things where...
this is interesting, the ranges.
Yes.
And how you look at everything. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things. Number one, they look at your creatinine levels when they're sort of judging kidneys. Now, one of the problems you run into with that is if you worked out the day before, like strength training.
Like I did for each of those tests, yeah.
Yeah. You're going to look like you have kidney disease.
Yeah.
Because you break down muscle, your body has to clear out the stuff. It's perfectly fine. But, it's one of these things where your doctor just looks at the number. And then, if they're responsible, they will either ask you a bunch of questions or order some follow-up tests.
Yeah. Which we did.
Yeah, and you're perfectly fine.
And I was fine, and I had forgotten that I had intensely worked out on both of these tests, and they're so expensive, and it's like, why did I do that?
Because realistically, if you want it to be as accurate as possible, you want to be fasted first thing in the morning, and you don't want to work out for 2 days beforehand. Because the fact is like when you work out, you break stuff down. Your kidneys do their job and filter out the stuff.
Yeah. But I think what was also interesting from that experience was how varied the range for kidney disease was in Canada and the US. Remember, my numbers were, I think, close to I can't remember if it was top or low end, right? I think it was the high end or
Yeah.
something like that. And so she initially was concerned. And then when we actually looked it up in the US, I was completely well within the range, which was, you know.
Well, and this is to give you an idea. Like, take something like, you know, from a guy standpoint, like your testosterone level. The range, the normal range, and this is one of those things, and I'm doing air quotes. You know, we need to do this as like a YouTube video as well, but I'm doing air quotes. The normal range is 240 to like 910, and that's nanograms per deciliter, right? But that's a huge fucking range. So you could be like 260 and your doctor goes, you're fine. You're in the range. Meanwhile, you know, could have all of the like symptoms of like low testosterone. You're moody, your brain doesn't work, your libido's shot, your joints ache. Like there can be all these different things. But because you're in the range, you're good, right? Or the same thing, your iron. Like it was 1 point over the low end. And, oh, you're fine. You know?
Yeah.
So we just made sure.
Because it's not flagged, you know, because the lab flags where there's an issue.
Yeah.
So if it's not flagged, you know, then the doctors are busy. They can skip, they might miss it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important to look at things like in concert with others.
Yeah.
Like if one thing is looking to be a problem, so you can't automatically assume that there's an issue with your kidney or whatever. You have to look at something else as well, right? And your activity and your lifestyle. What are you doing? So as you were saying, ask a bunch of have your doctor ask a bunch of questions. So definitely worthwhile doing, especially as you're, you know, improving your lifestyle and your fitness and well-being over years to benchmark how you've progressed.
Yeah. Like, because obviously like how you look and the size of your pants and all that stuff are kind of benchmarks for the outside, but your blood is the benchmarks for the inside.
It's just being proactive.
Yeah. But it's a thing where you need to educate yourself about it because, you know, like I said, you'll run into doctors who will look at different things and literally if you're in the range, you're good.
So what are some good sources to do that, Winston? Where would you start if you want to educate yourself? Do you literally just look everything up and go, what does this mean? And
yeah, that's sort of what I would, but I realize for a lot of people, like, it's over their head, but I guess I just run into the thing. It's like, nobody gives a shit about your health more than you do. Mm-hmm. So you should be the expert on you.
Yeah, I actually have a medical journal that I keep on myself now.
Yeah, like a whole file folder. And
it's not even a folder, it's a journal.
Yeah.
So because I forget.
Yeah.
So now I think I started it because I just forget. And I do. And so it's only for issues, anything to do or health concerns or things like that. Maybe I should put more details, like, you know, if I start a certain, you know, like my training regimen and, you know, what am I doing? Because sometimes you can link injuries to what you've just done, right?
Yeah.
For example.
Or like it. Yeah.
Like a log, you know?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like tracking what you're doing, what the result is. Like you are a science experiment where the study group is N equals 1. Mm-hmm. But if you don't keep any data, you know, like you don't log anything, sometimes correlating what does what is difficult, looking back. Right?
It is, especially, you know, when you mix a bunch of things. And you know, speaking through experience, my mom was a few years ago was in ICU because she had a really bad adverse reaction to chemotherapy for breast cancer. She had congestive heart failure, and it was just and it was shocking at how unorganized our healthcare system is in Canada, well, in Ontario. I'll speak to that, where they had to make some pretty fast and critical decisions. And had we not told them that we knew that she had, or there was some discussion around her having rheumatoid arthritis, she would have been in trouble. They would have given her a certain procedure or medication that would have conflicted with that.
Mm-hmm.
So really important to be on top of your health, be proactive, and your medical records. Just being on top of that, because as you were saying, you are your best advisor. And just going one step further, there are times that, I didn't understand everything, and you won't always, especially if it's a serious thing that your doctor's talking to you about, you will be in shock. And if you're going for follow-up appointments, always take a recorder, ask if you can record, just so that you can process this again after, take notes, or have somebody else there. Yeah. But I actually would recommend, if it's a serious condition, I know we're not talking about serious conditions today, but to do all three. Because when you're in those circumstances, I've been in them twice, you're not thinking straight. And so,
and in episode 5, we're going to teach you how to think straight under stress.
So take records.
Yeah. So the thing we run into is it's hard to get somewhere if you don't even know where you are, right? So think about like your first full blood workup as your starting point. Let's say you're 40, right? You go in and maybe, and these are fairly common ones, right? Maybe your overall cholesterol's a little high. Your HDL, the high density lipids, is a little low. Your LDL's a little high, right? So the good is down a little bit below where it should be, and the bad cholesterol, I don't want to call it bad cholesterol, but the one that we want lower is a little higher. Maybe you're deficient in a couple of vitamins, maybe you're low in vitamin D. Now you know where you're starting, right? And now it's one of those things. It's like you can do some stuff, both lifestyle, nutrition, supplementation. You start making some changes, right? And then in 6 months, you get checked again. And then look at that, and did you make some progress, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you going in the right direction?
What age would you recommend people start doing blood work?
20.
Yeah.
Well,
so what was normal then?
Yeah, like, it's one of those things, like, whenever. Like, basically, it's sort of like exercise. If you're not doing it, the best time to start doing it is now.
Yeah.
Because it's much easier to reverse the beginning of a problem than get a stent put in your heart because you have clogged arteries.
Here's a very real example of what's going on today with vaccinations and the instance in which, and I'm not concerned about this, but it happens. The enlargement of the heart. What is that? Mitochondria? Is that what? No,
mitochondria. That's the little power plant within the cells that converts, energy.
So what am I talking about when your heart enlarges?
Heart enlargement. Why complicate it?
There's a name for it.
I know. There's a name for everything.
Okay. So anyways, there's that. But is that you were saying that that's because of a pre-existing condition, and had people, and the way to actually resolve that, if I'm correct and I heard you understood you correctly, was to take baby aspirin or blood thinner. Is that correct?
Well, no, that was for blood clots.
Sorry. Okay. So is any of that, those two issues, you being susceptible to heart enlargement or blood clots, could that be detected through this blood work? Is that a great example that if you knew
So that clotting, yes.
Okay.
Because again, it's your blood.
Right.
Much easier to see risk of clotting in your blood markers.
Right.
And then, as far as like heart enlargement, and see, this is the tough thing is that a lot of times when they say heart enlargement, they're almost talking out their ass because they didn't have either like an MRI or an electrocardiogram of the person's heart before they got vaccinated.
Got it.
Right. So it's kind of like attributing, a result without having the
proof beforehand. that
the
existed.
before picture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So either way, it's ridiculously rare.
Right.
Right.
No, I was just curious
Yeah.
if the blood work would be great tools, that when, in this example,
Yeah.
people are concerned about something, then you're now aware.
Yeah, because sort of the thing Catherine was talking about with the baby aspirin, our first vaccine was AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca had a very low risk, but still a risk of blood clots.
Amongst men or men and women?
Anybody.
Okay. Well, how come you didn't tell me to take aspirin?
Well, because I've seen your blood already.
Oh, okay.
You're fine.
So you knowingly go on.
So then I just basically for 2 weeks before I went and got my vaccine, because I knew what I was getting, I just took baby aspirin. If you take a baby aspirin each day, it acts like a blood thinner. So
I got my blood work before I did the vaccine.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you don't have particularly thick blood to begin with.
It's never been alerted to you. Did you?
Pardon?
Did you?
Not. No, but it's one of those things where I'm a little bit older than you, and heart disease runs in my family, but they're also like overweight. So
yeah. When was your last blood work?
last year.
You take it yearly, eh?
Yeah. Because you just get it done.
Okay,
when you
you're
get
clear.
Yeah, you just get it done when you get your physical.
No, I meant you're clear from you did check me properly.
Yeah.
Not just that about you. I was doing could you tell I was doing the time check? I'm like, did I take my blood work before the vaccine? Or are you just pulling that out of your ass?
No, but the thing is, I'm the one who's.
Did you really care about me?
I'm the one interpreting your blood work regularly, right?
I know. I'm just.
You go. What does this mean?
I'm just reconciling.
Yeah. So yeah, like get your blood work done. Know where your different levels are because you can be preventative about things. You can catch problems before they become problems.
Yeah.
Right. Because certain things it'll show your like blood sugar levels, your fasting glucose. There's a number of things sort of showing your metabolic health as it pertains to like insulin. Then, sort of the health of your blood itself. What's your red blood cell count? Your platelets, your.
And that speaks to your immune system?
Well, the white blood cell count will. Like there's, will you have a clotting problem either for like too much or too little? Like hemophiliacs, they'll bleed out. They won't clot properly. And then they tend to bruise very easily because, the blood doesn't work right. So knowing these things, like a lot of people don't want to get it done because they're afraid what they're going to see.
Oh.
Right. But if you get it done,
look under the hood.
But then you can do something about it.
That's it. And it doesn't take much to clean it up.
No. Like for instance, somebody with maybe their blood sugar levels, like the resting glucose levels are a little bit too high. Something like Berberine, right? It's basically an extract from a shrub. It's an alkaloid. And what you run into with it is tons of studies behind it. Anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 milligrams a day, spread out through the day because it's got a short half-life, and that just means it clears your system quickly. So you dose multiple times a day, 2 to 3 times. And in the studies, it's almost as effective as the type 2 diabetes drug metformin at lowering blood sugar levels. And it raises the good cholesterol, like good, HDL, and lowers the LDL. It basically, for a relatively inexpensive supplement with good safety parameters behind it, right? It's not toxic, doesn't appear to be liver toxic. Like, when you look at like all of the data behind it, it's kind of low hanging fruit, right? For somebody who might be metabolically challenged a little bit, if you look at your blood test, then, a couple of very common ones, is vitamin D and magnesium, right? Most people in North America are deficient in vitamin D, right? We're indoor cats. Vitamin D comes from food, but it's also made when we're exposed to the sun. But then what happens if we're exposed to the sun too much? We get skin cancer.
Right.
Right? Because we're living way longer than we were meant to, right? Vitamin D from the sun's not a big deal when we all die at 50, at the latest.
Yeah.
Right? Most of us get eaten by tigers back in the day. Basically taking vitamin D, getting those levels up. Like if we look at the studies correlating low vitamin D levels and really negative outcomes if you get COVID.
Yeah.
Right?
There's correlation there.
Vitamin D, one of the great things with it is it's cheap and it has kind of the same effect as our workouts do in a weird way. Because how our workouts, they're not the best at anything, right? But they build a bit of muscle. They improve your conditioning. They make you stronger. There's good mobility component. Like when you do circuits, right? It's improving a whole bunch of things at once. It's not the best at any one of those things, but you see a bunch of things improve. So it seems like it's got a bigger result than the time spent doing it.
Okay.
Well, vitamin D is involved in over 200 chemical processes in the body. So if you're deficient in it...
Where the fuck do you remember all this shit from? I'm sure our listeners are wondering too.
I have a large head.
Like 200 chemical processes. Like, come on. Surprised you didn't say 198
It was actually, I believe, technically, I think it's 206. I was trying to be,
rounding.
Yeah. But magnesium, we'll get to in a second, is over 300. So the thing you'll run into is, like, if you are a fan of Joe Rogan, you've probably seen Dr. Rhonda Patrick on. She's like a crazy nerd research lady,
Yeah.
But she's just really
nerdy.
Yeah, like it just right into the science of it,
yeah.
Right? Because that's what her job is. She's a researcher. But pretty much universal. Everybody do 4,000, 5,000 IUs a day. It's not going to hurt you. Like it's really hard unless you go crazy with the numbers.
Yeah,
it's hard to be toxic with the stuff.
Yeah, and is it the kind of thing that you need it to be in your system for some time for it to take effect?
Yeah, because it's got to build up.
It's got to build up.
And
then once you have it in your system, even when you get off of it, it takes time for you to wean off of it. For it to deplete from your system.
A little bit, yeah. Like it's got a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But it's one of those ones. It's so cheap, everybody should take it all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And what you'll run into, like if you look at adequate vitamin D levels, equate with better hormone outcomes, like more optimal, testosterone and estrogen, and
which can affect mood
and libido and energy and muscles and bones and cardiac health and and so kind of a low-hanging fruit. Magnesium, again, involved in hundreds of chemical processes in the body. Inadequate levels mean your quality of sleep will be negatively affected. It's involved in making the DNA repair enzymes. When we're talking about longevity, your body needs to replicate DNA. And because it's a shitty photocopier, sometimes when it replicates DNA, it's not exact, right? And so the DNA repair enzyme kind of works to fix so that you get better. But if you don't have enough magnesium, you're not fixing the DNA properly.
I don't think a lot of people take magnesium.
Well, that is correct, because 58% of North American people are deficient. So yeah, they are not. So best source is magnesium glycinate, or if you can get some mixed sources where
Is that the carrier? Glycinate?
It's the form that the magnesium's bonded to, right? Because you can get magnesium oxide. It's the cheapest, but it's the least bioavailable.
Okay.
Right? So magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, they're a little bit more expensive. Not crazy expensive, but a little bit more expensive. The science kind of leans towards, and it'll vary, based on the person, but, about 500 milligrams a day as far as supplementation goes. It's involved in bones. It's involved in, all of these different processes.
Why you didn't become a pharmacist or a doctor, I don't know. Like you just start citing off milligrams and dosages, and it's like...
Yeah, but I've been doing this stuff for like 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's sort of one of the things I don't mismatch my supplements when I take them, so that I feel...
Well, that's why I asked for a pill box.
Yeah.
For my supplements.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, like everybody, if you're young, you're middle-aged, you're old, those two are just such low-hanging fruit.
Magnesium and vitamin D.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about vitamin C. Like that's, if I was to remember a vitamin or a supplement when I was growing up, it was vitamin C, because everybody talks about it. So what's your take on vitamin C?
You need it, but most people aren't deficient in it. Right? So it's one of those things where if people were deficient in it, we would be seeing scurvy all over the place, people's teeth falling out. And if you want to take some extra vitamin C, because it works with your immune system and a bunch of things, it's not going to hurt you because it's a water-soluble vitamin. So whatever you don't use, you'll just piss out. Right? So... but just the reality comes in is that the research on megadosing vitamin C isn't, there just doesn't seem to be a ton of efficacy or, benefit to it. There can definitely be some negatives, like gastrointestinal upset, competes with other nutrients for absorption. A little bit of vitamin C, taking, 500 milligrams when you take your iron, will improve the absorption of the iron. But this is the thing we run into, is a lot of nutrients compete with other nutrients for absorption.
Okay.
Right? So if you take X with Y, they absorb better. But if you take, P with Q...
That's confusing. There should be an app for this.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe we need to get the rights before this comes out.
But that's sort of one of the things. Now, one of the easy ways around it is if you eat a diet that's full of lots of fruit and vegetables.
I mean, that's always the best source of your nutrients and vitamins.
It's just those few things that are more likely to be deficient,
right,
that we sort of focus on.
Yeah.
And one of the things you're running into because of... And I'm not at this point not going to be lambasting, modern agriculture. But one of the effects is the fact that the soil tends to have less nutrients in it. So some of the trace minerals, like zinc or selenium, you may see less quantity in vegetables than you did 30 or 40 years ago. Right? Just because... with modern fertilizers, they can
deplete the soil.
Well, they can make that soil work, but it may not have some of the nutrients as high as it used to, right?
And what about the fact that our body chemistry's changed over the years, right? With GMOs, right?
Well, what's changed?
With hormones and...
Well, that's not really from GMOs.
Okay.
That's a lot of that's from plastics. So here's one of the interesting things, and this is there's some research on it, then a bit of educated guessing on my part, but there's a lot of environmental estrogens out there. You know, and it's funny that the fact that with you know, basically various types of pollution, because before like BPA plastics came along, or BPA free, you were getting plastics that had like bottles and all that kind of thing that would give off estrogens, right? And so if we take sort of a step back, just so people sort of understand, estrogen is thought of as like the female hormone, and testosterone is thought of as the male hormone. And while that is generally correct, women to function properly need testosterone, and men to function properly need estrogen, right? The difference between men and women is the ratios. Guys, let's say, you know, if a guy's got you know, a testosterone, like a total testosterone, because some of this shit gets a little confusing for people, but total testosterone of 800 might have, you know, if everything's in balance, might have an estrogen of 30, right? Whereas a woman's testosterone level will be, you know, if a guy's got an 800, she might have a 30 to 80, like 1/10, right? And a higher amount of estrogen. So it comes into a thing where, because of those differences in ratios, is why women tend to be a little bit smaller and softer, like tend to have a little more body fat, because higher estrogen levels will retain more body fat, but don't have beards and deep voices. And that's why, you know, because testosterone is both anabolic in the sense of building the guns, and androgenic as in masculinizing, right? And so if a guy has too much testosterone, well, not too much, but just a part of the testosterone, I'm going to take a step back. Guys' estrogen, right, which we need because there's neuroprotective elements to it. It's heart protective. It, like, if a guy doesn't have enough estrogen, he'll have brittle bones. You know, if you don't have enough estrogen, you'll have no libido and won't be able to get it up. Right? So it's all about balance.
Okay.
Right? So one of the interesting things, though, that we run into is the way that the feedback circuit in the brain works. Is your brain, or hypothalamus actually, goes, how are we for estrogen? If your estrogen is low, because the only source for estrogen in the male body should be converted testosterone. So if estrogen is low, it'll mean testosterone's low. If estrogen's high, it means testosterone's high. You know, as far as the feedback loop goes. So if your hypothalamus does the little poll, you know, hey, how are we doing, estrogen? And estrogen yells back, oh, we don't have enough. Okay, no worries. Sends a signal to the pituitary, which then sends luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone to your nuts. Hey, testes, make some testosterone. And the testes make the testosterone, right? And it's this feedback loop. Well, with a lot of estrogen-like chemicals in the environment, in plastics and fertilizers and different things like that, we're running into the thing where over the last 30 years, or 40 years, when I was talking about in the blood tests, you know, the testosterone range, because that number is based on just an average of the population being tested.
Right.
They've moved it down over the last 30 years.
Because the normal range today is different.
Is lower, right? Well, it's not that it should be lower. It's just because it is lower, they lower what they say is normal.
Yeah.
Right? And this is sort of where my pulling a wild guess out of my ass is the fact that because the way that feedback loop is, we have more estrogens in the environment, so our brain, hypothalamus, but I'll just use brain as the stand-in for it, is going, oh, you got lots of estrogen, so you're good on testosterone. Right?
Got it. It's messed it up.
Yeah. Because why else, and when I say that, I'm already thinking of other ideas. People are lazier, right? More people, like men, did physical shit for jobs and things.
Right.
Well, when you lift heavy things and you swing sledgehammers and you do, more physical work.
You build resilience.
But you also, we know hard work stimulates, like, go do squats and your testosterone will go up.
Right. But I also think that there's a shift in almost like personality a little bit.
But that's, if you got lower testosterone, you're going to have a shift in personality.
That's what I'm saying. And where we had this conversation was with Alex in one of our other episodes who transitioned from female to male and then taking hormones, talked about, I used to cry a lot. Now I don't. My bucket's just bigger, and just the massive changes emotionally speaking. Yeah. So now if the body has more estrogen and lower testosterone, you're seeing a shift in
more sensitive fellas.
Yeah.
But we're not the kind of fellas you want around if the wolves come knocking.
Yeah.
And that's sort of one of those things I always joke. It's like young men almost need because in cultures around the world, like that transition from like boyhood to manhood, there's like some sort of trial that they have to go through to prove themselves. I think what that is also is just learning how to manage, like, that's structured that way. We don't have that anymore, right? But I think part of what that is set up unconsciously maybe to make them have a way to learn to manage having so much testosterone. Because you go from being a little kid, you hit puberty, and all of a sudden you're on roids, right? And then it takes a while to learn how to manage just being there, right? You're out of your fucking mind.
Yeah, you were needing to do all these aggressive sports.
Yeah, like that sort of.
Let it out.
Yeah, like I played
because you weren't dating at that age. You did.
But I played aggressive sports because it allowed me to be violent without getting in trouble.
I know.
And that's that thing with testosterone. Like, it's a hell of a hormone, but you have to learn how to manage it.
I guess it's like what they say about dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, they're just like ravenous. And...
Yeah. You just got to sort of learn. It's sort of like anything, right? It's a skill. But so that's sort of my surmising why we have less testosterone in the general population than we did previously. But when we get to that, when we're talking about longevity, right? One of the things that is open now, and this is both for men and women, the processes are different, but you reach a certain point where you feel like shit, you're doughy, you have no energy, your brain doesn't work, you have no drive, you have no sex drive. We now have testosterone replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy. And it's funny because you get people like, Joe Rogan. He's like, why the fuck would anybody want to feel shitty? When you can just basically go get a prescription and feel like you're 20 again, or 25 or, whatever it is. But you can actually continue on with that energy level, and one of the interesting things is because estrogen is so protective in many ways, as far as guys go, right? As far as bones and like their neurology and their heart. If your testosterone's low, your estrogen's going to be low, generally. So you don't have those protective elements. So all of a sudden, it's like your whole fucking body's falling apart. Whereas, basically, totally aside from the quality of life element, getting your testosterone back up into a healthy level will then get all the benefits for a male, all the benefits of estrogen.
Yeah,
right?
It'll just increase, yeah.
Yeah, and then sort of for a woman, they would add in estrogen. And what's nice is female hormone replacement used to be just estrogen and progesterone. And now they're being smart enough to add in a little bit of testosterone, right? Because, again, they all dropped off. So having a little bit of T, now your workouts work better. You've got more energy. Your sex drive is back, right? Like all these different things that women run into after menopause, right? So that's one of those things where we know you should exercise. But if you have no energy, right? Like it's almost like low, like your testosterone or estrogen and like all of your sex hormones being in the toilet.
Right.
Then make it much harder to you don't give a shit anyway because your mood is garbage. But to have the energy to work out, even if you should, right? Like to get the ball rolling. So it's one of these things where there's some definite both quality of life, the living better part, and longevity factor, because some studies have shown that in older men, testosterone replacement therapy reduces the risk of heart attacks. It reduces the risk of osteoporosis, right? Because the estrogen part of it.
Right.
All of these different benefits that contribute to longevity, and you feel better and you're stronger and you still have a sex drive. So lots of, potential benefits to talk over with your doctor. The problem is that so many doctors are uneducated about it, right?
There should really be a lab on a chip where you give your blood, you do all the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
But you can manage that yourself.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. I'd pay big bucks for that.
Mm-hmm.
To have that.
Yeah, because there are telehealth clinics and that kind of thing. But then God Bless America. And
that's not the same thing. I'm talking.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things of sort of having access to different specialists as well. But if you had all of your own medical records, with you access to them, because right now, if you wanted all, I'm not talking your printed paper stuff, but like your medical records, right? They're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. That having it sort of centralized and us have access to it.
Yeah.
Is the kind of thing that lets you make better choices.
Oh no, I'm just talking about, lab on a chip, you do it yourself and then you upload the results, kind of like your Me3 DNA and me, 23andMe DNA, whatever that.
Well, then you send that in and they test it.
Hang on. What was it? Yes. And I put it into another database to
get analyzed.
Yeah.
Oh, that exists already.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about that yet. We should. Yeah. Yeah. So 23andMe did that, took the data. I can't remember if it was from Joe Rogan or another. It was Ben Greenfield.
Yeah.
He was talking about where to upload it. And I did. Can't remember. Do you remember my results? But the one thing I think that came back that was overwhelmingly clear, yes, it was my telomeres. Mm-hmm. I am susceptible to broken tails on my telomeres. Mm-hmm. And your telomeres are the
tails of your genes. DNA.
And if they're broken, then
they don't replicate properly. The shorter your telomeres are, the quicker you age.
Yeah.
Which is like sort of you want long flowing telomeres.
Yeah.
You want lots of that DNA repair.
Which is interesting to do as well. Mm-hmm. Because I was checking to see what I was prone to, and it actually did say that the best diet, if you look at ancestral diet, is basically the keto diet, is what it was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Lower carb for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some sources? You mentioned a few times clinical studies, these studies what I'm talking about is backed by scientific evidence. How do you go about evaluating a study? Because I think there's a lot of people who don't understand this, and I think that's worthwhile talking about.
So first, one study doesn't mean shit, right? It's looking at a preponderance of the study. So something with one study that sort of indicates something is interesting, but it means nothing.
Because it was published, it means nothing. Yeah.
So, and this is going to get a little nerdy, but I will look at the individual studies. I will look at how they were structured, right? Like, what variables are you controlling for?
Okay. What's your bias, maybe?
Well, but that's sort of a total different thing. Like, but I mean, just how this study is structured. Like, sometimes they're just structured garbage, right? It's like, but you didn't look at this, you didn't look at this, you didn't look at this. Like,
of course you're going to get that.
Yeah. Like, it's confusing, If you're so lucky that there is a meta-analysis, which is where somebody took the time to analyze all the studies and average them out. It's sort of a study of the studies, and it's sort of like the highest level kind of analysis you can get to, because now it's not looking at one source, it's looking at all the sources, right? And they're analyzing each study setup and then weighting how much weight each study gets when they're sorting the data, right? So that's kind of the gold standard if you can find it on an item.
So you just Google meta-analysis and whatever the question
thing is, if you can, yeah. And, it's one of those things of like, and going into things with a scientific mindset, which is, this looks interesting, but if the data doesn't go there, then neither do I, right? You go where the data leads, and don't put any emotional weight into anything, right? Because this is the thing that I've seen fuck so many people, right? Like, they so want a thing to be the thing, right? Like
they want their intuition to be accurate.
The magic bullet, that then all of a sudden, like, they're able to have this cognitive dissonance because they all of the data goes, it doesn't really do anything, right? At best, and sometimes, hey, this is negative. And then you talk to them, and then they're like, they are a cheerleader for a thing, even though all of the data, or the preponderance of the data is pointing to it being a waste of time, right? Like, if I put any emotional weight into any of these things, like, I'd be a wreck, because so much of it turns out to be nothing, right? And so that's the thing of, like, I want what works. I want what's actually going to get results, right? And not like a 2% better result than not taking it, Like, I want something that's going to actually do something worthwhile. And so it's one of those things. It's like taking the time. Like, PubMed. Look up PubMed. Because you can look at all sorts of studies on all sorts of topics.
And they have meta studies there too?
Yeah, it's just a conglomerate. It's basically medical studies. And so it's one of those things. If a given thing has a meta-analysis, or sometimes there's multiple meta-analysis, right?
Go ahead.
And that's where you start building a framework for your understanding of things. So
scientific research and study is not my background. So I thought it was interesting when you were talking about how there's a culture around scientists that when somebody publishes, you get all these other peers, it becomes peer reviewed. Does it have to become peer reviewed? Is that part of it before it gets published?
Well, if it's going to be published in a reputable journal.
Okay.
Right?
It's going to get peer reviewed, and they're trying to tear it to pieces.
Yeah,
because that's how they build credibility.
Yeah, like if you can, if somebody's coming out with something and you can, basically, peer reviewed means other scientists are going through and looking at your method, looking at your results, looking at your conclusions, and are more than happy to go, you're a fucking idiot. This person, this is bullshit. Right? There's some that'll probably take a little bit too much glee in it, but one of the interesting things, like we'll take Ivermectin, the antiparasitic drug. So it was being investigated by as a prophylactic for COVID. And when there was a meta-analysis of all the different studies, there was one study out of Argentina that had a much larger subject group. So it statistically skewed the results. And so when that was then being reviewed, right? Because there's pre-publishing, like things are put out, right? But then when it was actually being reviewed, before it gets kind of the seal of approval, some of the people looking at it went, this is complete bullshit. Like the Argentinian study. And it turns out the study wasn't even done. The hospital that, they said it was done at was contacted and went, we've never had that. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like it was made up. Right? So then subsequently you go back, you pull that one out of the meta-analysis, and ivermectin does shit for COVID. Right? But because it skewed it enough.
Right.
Right. Because the study was proportionally so much bigger than any of the other ones. Right. And so it's one of the things is like the people that are kind of anti-science will go, look, science is just making shit up. But one of the things that I love with the method is that it's self-correcting.
Right. Corporations aren't ruling it.
Yeah. Like basically you get some science clout for finding that shit. And so it's one of these things where not to say that there isn't bullshit that squeaks through, but one of the things you run into is don't go by magazine or like headlines. Study finds.
Yeah. Stats can be pitched in any different way that somebody chooses to portray it. You always want to look at the source, always want to look at the credibility of the person citing this.
Yeah, and you want
to, and where they've published it, is it reputable? And then look at the meta-analysis and see if anybody else has done the same thing, and they all have the same findings. Yeah, because if you get something like, like I was talking about Berberine, there's study after study after study. One study looks at cholesterol, one study looks at blood sugar. Then there's another one that looks at insulin response, but they all point in the same direction. Right? So it's like, well, we're looking pretty good here. Right? Like another one is creatine. Right? Most studied sports supplement on the planet. Why?
Why?
Yeah.
It's cheap. It's easy to study. When people are studying things, they like to actually have a positive result, not just and it did nothing. So yeah, like I think it's one of those things where also it's not sort of like a weird one that might be kind of like a drug or a this or that. It's creatine monohydrate. Like our body already has creatine in them, right? And it gets like creatine phosphate is your on-demand energy system, right? So when you take creatine monohydrate, it increases just a bit, your on-demand energy supply. So for explosive things like lifting weights, sprinting, to give you an idea, let's say, before taking creatine, you could like bench press a weight 10 times. After creatine, you might get 12. Right? Just lets you get a couple more.
Yeah.
And a couple of pluses that come with it is it appears, aside from the athletic benefit side of it, it appears that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And so now it's given the brain a little more energy, right? There seems to be some, in the studies on this are quite interesting and promising, is that it seems to have like a neuroprotective element to it. May fix brain damage, or at least lean that way a little bit. There seems to be a protection against like degenerative brain conditions like Alzheimer's. So if you can take some like jacked juice, some creatine, so you get to be jacked and your brain works a little better.
So we've got coffee makers, and at our local incubator here at Velocity, somebody was making a cocktail maker. We need a supplement maker. Like, it just naturally comes with all the supplements and based on what Catherine needs. And
it just mixes it right.
She doesn't have to worry about fucking it up.
Yeah.
And
it's just all in a tasty, like, blueberry smoothie.
Exactly. I'm going to patent that.
Yeah. But that's sort of that thing, right? Like, there are a number of compounds that have, either heart protective effects, neuroprotective effects, and all basically can make you like just perform a little better.
Yeah.
Right. Antioxidants of different types. Right. Like taking whey protein, like a scoop of whey protein every day. Whey protein isolate, because concentrate will tend to make you gassy. Tends to raise the level of glutathione in your body. And that's like kind of like the master antioxidant. Right? So that's why whey protein, it'll help your muscles and recovery and all that kind of thing. But it also has some other protective elements to it. Right? Because it's got those building blocks of making powerful antioxidants. So what we run into is... because if you took everything that had a little bit of an indication, unless somebody comes up with an awesome formula that's got, CoQ enzyme or CoQ10 and acetyl L-carnitine and N-acetylcysteine, maybe I'm going to make a longevity formula.
My eyes are glazing over.
But the fact is, a lot of these compounds have, good scientific, support behind them. And so it's a thing where it's like, think of your longevity pyramid, right? At the base, is exercise, right? And then the next layer is nutrition. And using exercise and nutrition to manage your body weight and, nutrients and all that kind of thing. Then, somewhere in that one has to be stress and sleep. We haven't figured out what level it's going to go on yet, but it's going to be the next episode. But, as you're getting towards, when you're getting the big pieces covered, that's where things like these come in. Right? Putting, the little details, the little nudges. Like, you can't smoke, eat McDonald's, be, massively overweight and not exercise and think that a bit of berberine or some fish oil is going to fix it for you. right? They're not. But if you're doing all of the other things right, then they can give you an edge, right? Just as like supplements for working out, right? You got to do everything right, and then you got
to put in the work.
Yeah, and then they can give you a bit of an edge.
Yeah,
right. That's the
get you over the hump.
Yeah, that's the thing I want people to sort of take away. They're not shortcuts. They're icing.
That was a perfect ending.
Yeah. So, until the next episode, where we're going to go practice right now, because next episode's on sleep.
Maybe, yeah. Anyway.
So work hard.
Play dirty.
And until next time.
Bear chink bear.